Today we're beginning the modification process on my all-new third generation Toyota Tundra with a 2-inch spacer lift. Now, because this is an all-new vehicle to market, there's not a lot of great options out there in terms of suspension upgrades just yet. They're coming soon, but they're not here at the moment. And so I'm going to start off with just this cheap 2-inch spacer lift. You can buy this off of Amazon. I think it was like 35 bucks or something. I'll put a link to it in the description below if you want to check it out. This is just going to be the phase one of the build, and as better options become available, then I'll upgrade the suspension down the road. This is basically just to get a level look on the truck and the ability to clear a set of 35-inch tires. Before we get started, I know we'll get some questions about the vehicle height. From the center of the wheel hub to the bottom of the fender flare here, we're at 21.5 inches on both the driver and front passenger side. And then at the back of the vehicle, we're at 23.5 inches. Before we get started, we're gonna jack up the vehicle and we're gonna remove the wheel and tire from both the driver and front passenger side. With the vehicle lifted up, my next step is to disconnect the sway bar on both sides of the vehicle. We're going to swing that out of the way to give us better access to the lower shock mount. It's possible that you could remove it without this step, but I think that's going to give us better overall access. You're going to need a 19mm wrench to remove this nut on the sway bar. So remove that on both sides and put all of these components in a safe spot for reinstallation. I've got the nut removed here from the sway bar, connecting it to the link, but there's too much tension here and I'm not able to get it free of that. And the more that I look at it, I do think that I need to remove this in order to drop down the suspension and get the shock and coil out. And so I think this definitely needs to be disconnected. Since we've got too much tension here, I'm gonna go ahead and just drop down the whole sway bar. It's really not that complicated. We do need to remove the skid plate, and then we've got 4 bolts, 1, 2, and then 2 on the other side. They are 17mm. We're just gonna remove those. The sway bar is a little bit heavy, so be careful as you're doing this step. Maybe get somebody to assist you or just kind of be ready to catch that as you remove the bolts. You'll need to remove this skid plate. We've got 4 12mm bolts, 1, 2, and we've got 2 that are hidden under this plastic piece. I don't think it's necessary to remove this piece to access those, but it's hard to get a good camera angle. With the sway bar out of the way, we're ready to remove this 22mm nut and bolt that are passing through the lower shock mount. You'll want to make sure that you've got a wrench on both sides so that it doesn't spin on you. Breaker bar is going to be handy here as this one is pretty tight, although I've already pre-loosened it. So we're going to go ahead and remove that. We want to make sure as we remove all these pieces that we set them aside somewhere safe, as it can be kind of easy to lose track of parts. And then next we're gonna tap this bolt through. Take a hammer and just gently tap it through. And once it gets that far, you want something to push it the rest of the way. I've just got a large Allen wrench here. I'll just put that on the end and tap it through. And once again, we'll set that aside so we don't lose it. And then we're ready to loosen the 2 bolts that are down here on the bottom. I'll give you a better view in just a moment. For these, they're pretty tight. So again, you're gonna need a breaker bar, and you may even need an impact wrench to get those ones undone. So here's a closer look from underneath. We've got one right here at the back and one here at the front. Next, we're going to remove these 4 nuts on the top of the shock mount, 2 in the front and then 2 in the back. Make sure you don't remove this one that's on the top. That's what's holding your coilover together, and that could be potentially very dangerous to remove that. With all 4 nuts removed from the upper shock mount, we're ready to remove the coilover, but to do that, we're gonna have to drop down the lower control arm so that we can bring it out. For this step, you're gonna need a 24mm wrench, and we're going to loosen this nut here as well as one on the inside. I'll give you a look at that in just a moment. It's really important in this step that you don't remove those entirely. You're basically loosening them the bare minimum that you need to get the lower control arm to swing down. I also think this is a good step to have a jack underneath the lower control arm so it doesn't just swing out under you. You don't want the coilover to drop down. You want to make sure that it doesn't damage anything when you're pulling it out. So you want to have that in position so you can just gently drop that down. So we've got this nut on the front, and then we've got this nut in the back. Again, don't remove these entirely, just gently loosen them. So I use the impact wrench to get these loosened just a little bit, and then I'm going to use the breaker bar the rest of the way so that I don't go too overboard. Okay, I think we might be loose enough now. So I'm going to go ahead and take this jack out of the way now. It didn't swing down on us, fortunately, but we'll move that, and then we'll just push down on the lower control arm, be ready to catch the coilover as we go. Okay, I think we're free enough. That should do it. It is a tight squeeze getting this out. You want to make sure as you're doing it that you don't damage any of these other components, and just be careful not to scratch things, especially if you're particular about like the finish on the coils. I think we're gonna have to loosen that a little bit more. It's not quite enough. Need just a little more clearance to get it out. There we go. I think we're good now. There we go, we're out. All right, so now we're ready to install the spacer on top of the coilover. So to do that, first we'll just stand this up. And then if you look on the top of this, there's an indicator that says out. You've got the little blue dot, and it says out there. On the top of the spacer, there's a little white arrow. So we're gonna line up that white arrow with the arrow that's on the top here. So we're just gonna set this on like so. And then the 4 nuts that we removed from the upper shock mount, we're just gonna take those 4 nuts, they're the 14 millimeter, and we're just going to put these on here to connect the spacer to the coilover. Once those are hand tight, then we're gonna take a wrench and tighten them up the rest of the way. Want to make sure that we go in kind of crisscross formation so we don't over tighten any of the 4 corners. We want them to be even. As far as how tight to go on these nuts, my specific spacer didn't come with a torque specification. If yours did, I'd follow that. And because this is an all-new truck, there's not a lot of information or resources out there just yet, so I don't know what the exact torque specifications are, so I'm gonna be guessing a little bit here. What I'll do is in the video description, I'll go ahead and provide the torque specs that you should follow for, say, the Tacoma or the 4Runner, and then if better information comes available down the road, I'll update the description with those numbers. But honestly, I am kind of guessing right now, so I'd recommend that you do your research if you're concerned about the exact torque specifications. With that, we're ready to reinstall the coilover with the spacer. On the top of the spacer, you'll see that there's a little divot right here. Get that close. We're gonna face that straight out when we install it. And one thing that you will find is that the lower shock mount isn't gonna line up the way that it did before. We're gonna go ahead and install it, get the top mostly tight, and then we'll twist the bottom to get it to line up with the lower shock mount. All right, so we're gonna slide the coilover back through the way that we took it out to begin with. It may be a little bit trickier to get it through now that you've got a spacer on the top because it's a little taller. Hopefully this goes smoothly. Again, make sure you got that divot facing out as you go. And I should have got my upper bolts ready ahead of time. I didn't, so we'll just kind of set it there on the lower mount. And then the hardware that we're going to install on the top is going to come with the spacer. And rather than a nut that connects to the bolt going through, now we're going to have a bolt going down into the spacer. With this specific kit, we got a bolt, we got a locking washer that we're gonna put on first, and then a regular washer. Okay, and we're just gonna put that through the upper mount, and then we got to get the hole to line up on the coilover. We're going to gently screw that in. We'll go ahead and start by getting one of these in just a little bit, and then we'll get the other 4. We don't want to over tighten again on any of these 4. This step's a little tricky because you can't really see the hole, so I'm going to take a little bit of play to get it. There we go. So we'll just go a little bit hand tight, not all the way, and then we'll just do the same thing with the other 3. The next step of the install is probably what I struggled on the most. If you've got a little bit more muscle than me, you might be okay. But the lower end of the shock here, we need to twist it to line up with the lower mount. So you're gonna need something like an iron bar that we can pass through and then just twist it to straighten it out with that lower mount. All right, now that the lower end of the shock is aligned with the lower shock mount, we're ready to raise the lower control arm up, and then we're gonna pass this bolt back through. Again, the head of the bolt goes on the back side, and then we're gonna put the nut on the front side here. I've got the bottle jack positioned underneath the lower control arm to raise this up slowly, and as I go, we'll just align the lower end of the shock. Let's do this slowly until that hole lines up. We're going to take our washer and our nut. We're just going to do this hand tight for now. We don't want to tighten this up until we get the 2 bolts down on the bottom here. All right, here's a better angle of where we've got those 2 more bolts that need to go through. We're going to pass through here and up to this piece. So you're going to want to use the bottle jack to kind of get this in position to get those 2 holes to line up, and then pass those bolts through. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and tighten up these 4 bolts on the top. We'll go in a crisscross pattern so that we get it seated nice. And again, on these, we'll provide torque specs when they are available in the description. Either that or follow what's provided with your spacer kit. Next, we're gonna tighten up this nut on the lower end of the shock. Then we're going to take our 24mm socket here, and we're going to tighten these back up. This one in the front as well as the matching one in the rear. So that does it for the shock installation. So the last 2 steps that we've got are to reinstall the sway bar. So we're going to position that back up with the hardware that we removed. Make sure to reconnect the links, and then last step is just going to be putting that skid plate back on. That's it for the lift kit. Now we've just got to reinstall the wheels and tires, and then we'll give you a look with the lift kit installed. Wheels and tires are on, and right now the front looks like it's sitting quite a bit higher than the back, but I'm hoping once we take it for a drive, it'll kind of settle out. I mentioned at the beginning that we had 21.5 inches from the center of the hub to the top of the wheel well here. Now we're at almost 25. So, and that's on both sides, but it does sometimes take a little bit of settling to occur for it to kind of get to where it needs to be. So hopefully that's the case. We'll take it for a quick drive and then check it out again. Well, after a trip around the block, it settled out okay, remeasured, and we're 23.5 inches from the center of the wheel hub to the bottom of the wheel well for the front and back on both sides. So it is perfectly level. Hopefully once I put some weight in the back, it's not sagging too much back there. But again, this is just phase 1 on the truck. Plan is to upgrade the suspension down the road. Of course, the next step for the Tundra is installing these bad boys. So the 35s. I think those are going to look pretty good. So look forward to these in probably the next video that comes up. Actually, this will probably be the next upload, is putting these tires on. So I'm excited to get them on and see how it looks with a set of 35s. If today's video was helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and for more videos of the all-new Tundra, be sure to subscribe. In the meantime, thanks for watching.